And tonight we're going to try to get into more of the complex situations that we come across in the Tahara process. And for those who are here this afternoon, I think it was there were certain just basic underlying principles and ideas that guide us through the process, the most important of which, of course, is ultimately kavod hameis, which is the kavod that we give to each and every mace, and we do the best we can. I'll try to just, before I go into the more common problems, I just would like to make a point that sometimes we come into a Tahara situation, and it's daunting. We take a look and we see tubes everywhere, and blood, and the person is large, and there's fluids, and there's skin slippage, and we're like kind of feeling like, how are we going to do this? So I always say, you need to just focus on it as individual problems. If you can look at the whole picture, it's very daunting. However, if we tackle one thing at a time, very often we are able to accomplish what you really never thought was able to be accomplished, was able to be done. You just need to break it down and to just say, and if in the end it's not going to be the perfect Tahara, or the Tahara that you would want for anyone, but it'll be a very nice Tahara, and it'll be as good as you possibly could have done under the circumstances, which is great. So you need to recognize that. I often tell the story of a Tahara that I once had to do with the head of another Chevra Kadisha who did not have a mikveh in the area where he worked. And they had a Tahara in one of our funeral homes because he was a member of the shul where this rabbi was involved. And he came down and he asked me to join them so I could just show them how to do the mikveh, how to use the hoist, how to operate the mikveh. So I came down, and it happened to be that as we opened the pouch, there was literally a ton of blood. I mean, the body was just lying in blood, literally from head to foot. And he looked at me, he says, well, I guess we're not using the mikveh. And I said, why are you so sure? He said, well, there's all this blood, how are we going to do, you don't lose blood, right? I said, no, we don't lose blood. And he says, so how are we going to do anything? I said, let's see. First of all, I said, let's see where the blood is coming from. Okay? So he was convinced that it was coming from the head because the head was full of blood. Sounds logical, because I told him I don't know that that's necessarily the case. Make a long story short, I'd say 90% of the blood, if not more, maybe all of it, was coming from a puncture in the arm, where somehow there was a puncture, some blood had been taken, and somehow there was also, the body was a little heavyish, and it was lying on that puncture, and it was just forcing out blood. So there was just literally a ton of blood. And of course, the blood traveled everywhere, traveled into the hair. We did find a certain cut somewhere, I don't remember exactly, somewhere on the head or somewhere in the forehead, whatever it was. I don't think that's where the blood was coming from. But to make a long story short, maybe we'll start with that, is we cleaned this person up to the point, we put him in the mikveh. And this rabbi was floored. He said he never believed that such a thing could be. And I said to him, you have to first of all find the source and then address it for what it is. There's a job here of cleaning up blood. Now, cleaning up blood is very complicated because besides the fact that you have a lot of blood, and even we talked earlier about people who are not so careful about losing blood that flows after death, when you're dealing with large quantities of blood, where it's more than a revius dam, then it becomes a bigger issue. Then it's also, according to many poskim, a revius dam requires kfura, even midoraisa. So therefore it becomes a much bigger issue, and everyone agrees we should try to stop the bleeding and to save the dam, which in this case we did. So let's talk about a couple of things. There's a body lying in a pool of blood. Now, the goal is to save the blood, and the goal is to clean the body. Now, this body was lying in a pouch, okay? So what you need to do to clean a body in that type of a situation is, and here again, I don't know how this works with the type of cloths that you use, but if you're using sheets like we do, we would take a sheet, and rather than cut it into the size that I demonstrated earlier, which is like I'd say 24 by 24 inches, or somewhere between 18 and 24 inches by 24 inches, something like this, okay, which is what we generally use to wash the body with. Rather than this size, we would take a sheet. You always use flat sheets, okay, if possible, and I would put it into eighths or even sixths, just fold it 2 or 3 times so that you have a full sheet in 8 parts, okay, equal parts. So it's going to be 2 or 3 times the size of this cloth. And then the goal is, in order to clean the blood that is dripping, you want a dry cloth. So you would take one of these dry cloths and clean. You would obviously turn the body on the side so you can get it out of the pouch. You would roll the pouch enough so that you're not going to be able to, blood's not going to run down, but at least that you'll contain whatever blood is there. And you start drying the back so that you pick up all the sopping wet blood in this dry sheet as much as you can, okay? You may have to use another one for the other side, but then you get the body off the sheet to the point where there's no running blood. Now let me tell you another thing. This is just a good idea. Anytime you have running blood, first thing you want to do is put a cloth like this into the drain at the bottom. So you're never dealing with blood that's going to run into the bowl or into the water. You're going to have something stopping. That's always a very good idea. You have an autopsy. You don't know what's going to happen. Just plug the hole at the bottom until everything's under control so that you don't have to deal with it. Okay? You don't have to worry about losing any dam. It'll be contained. So then you take a dry cloth, you clean, sop up the blood, and then you take a damp cloth. Now one of the basic rules, I'm not sure if I mentioned it earlier today or not, never clean blood with a wet cloth. You want to squeeze out the cloth so that you have a damp cloth rather than a dripping wet cloth. Because when you have a dripping wet cloth and you're washing blood or cleaning blood, you're going to get more blood that's running down in the cloth that's dripping. So you want to squeeze it out. So here, what you want to do is, the second cloth you use, once you've gotten all the wet blood under control, is now to clean the body with a damp cloth. Once you've finished and the cloth is pretty full of blood, you're going to take another dry cloth and you're just going to go over it again. And then you're going to go over it with another damp cloth. So you might have to do this process 3 times, but eventually you will have a situation where the entire body is clean. Now, of course, you have to find the source, because otherwise, as you're cleaning blood, you're getting more blood. So you want to find the source, use Mansell's, which is what we generally recommend, and stop the flow of blood. And that's it, you're in control. So here we found the source of the blood was this puncture. We cleaned it, we stopped it, and then we found this other thing, we stopped that, and then it was just a question of cleaning. So to clean the body, that's the way to do it. The problem is the head. You're going to get to the head, and now the hair has blood in it. The hair is another whole story. The problem is, first of all, each hair has blood all around it. It goes all the way down to the scalp. It gets very complex. The process is the same. But what you need to recognize is that if you're going to clean the blood on the right side, even if you have somebody on the left side, there's going to be blood that's going to just, when you turn, it's going to come right back to the side you already cleaned. So you want to clean the head as a unit. You want to clean the entire head together. So what you want to do is turn the body on its side. The way which we showed you this afternoon is really the best way to do it, so that the head is in the center of the table, and you have you don't have to worry about the weight of the body being on anyone, and clean the entire head as a unit on all sides. Dry cloth, wet cloth, dry. And, you can agitate the hair so that you're getting all around it. You're going all the way down to the scalp. It might take a while. I remember having the discussion with women, nowadays it could be men too, who have long hair, And what we suggested is you could actually take a bowl, one of those pots that we use with a little bit of water in it, and actually let the hair come into that so that you can clean it in the water that way and then just save it afterwards. You can do that. I have no issue with that. But you could just use dry cloths and damp cloths and let it take time. It might take 15, 20 minutes, okay? But you will be able to clean the entire body from blood. Now, if you have an incision in the head, you have a problem in the head, or you have an autopsy, you're obviously not going to be able to do this. If you have an incision and you're able to bring it under control with Mansell's, where you can get down to the source, and you can put Mansell's in and make sure that you go to the source and you're able to stop the bleeding. Sometimes it's just one puncture. If you put Mansell's on, we talked earlier today that it's mutter to sometimes cut a little bit of hair in one area so that you could address that puncture spot, then fine, that's what you'll do, and then you clean the hair, and you're able to literally do a full tahara, okay? Even if you're doing it in the mikveh, you're able to do it.
Would that hair be saved?
Yes, absolutely. We generally save, we talked about this earlier again today, 1 or 2 hairs is not something we're going to chase. If you want to save it, there's nothing wrong with saving it, but certainly if it's a clump of hair, or hair that you're cutting, or hair that you is coming out in larger numbers, you would save all of that hair and put it in with the blood, okay? So that's just a way of dealing with cleaning of blood. But you need to recognize that almost everything has a solution. If it doesn't have a solution, it gets very easy. You talk about a body where we'll talk about the most complex situations. A body that is found after a number of days or a number of weeks where there's a very significant amount of decomposition. There's very little you can do in those cases. Someone is in a horrific accident, okay, where the body's in parts or certainly very severely damaged. There's not much you can do. You have an autopsy that wasn't closed. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. We've had autopsies where they never sewed it up, and we found the organs came in a bag along with the body, alongside. I mean, you're not going to do a tahrah in those cases. So the goal in those cases is basically to make sure the person is buried, and we put them into the aron. We set up the aron the way we discussed it before, with a sheet first. We put the pillow in, we put the talus in, then you put the body in, and you basically must open the pouch, including where a body was decomposed and the smell is very significant. You must open the pouch, and if it's 2 pouches and you can take it out of one pouch, I would do that. Sometimes they put it in a disaster pouch, and then they'll put another pouch in, or the reverse. It'll be in one pouch and in a disaster pouch. You can take it out of the disaster pouch. A disaster pouch is made of black rubber. Okay, it's almost always black, and it's thick rubber. You don't want to bury someone in one of those pouches because, in essence, they will never return to the earth. Okay, the body will basically stay in that pouch, whether it's rubber or plastic, it doesn't deteriorate, and that's it. So you want to open the pouch, and you want to expose the body to the extent possible. We had a case 2 nights ago. When was it? It was sometime, I think it was last Wednesday or Thursday night. I don't think it was, I'm not even sure if it was my Chevra, somebody called me with the question, but it was a question, it was another Chevra. They had Jacob Creutzfeldt disease, which is the, Jacob Creutzfeldt is like mad cow disease in the human version. Now, Jacob Creutzfeldt disease, by the way, is not necessarily something to worry about if the body's in perfect condition. People whose family members have Jacob Creutzfeldt disease, visit them in the hospitals, they hug them. There's no chance of catching it in the normal way. Where it becomes dangerous is if the body is open, if their organs are exposed. If they did an autopsy, which in this case, they asked the family if they could use the brain for observation, and so they opened the brain, they did an autopsy and removed the brain. That's where it becomes extremely dangerous. And basically what they did was just put the body, they left it in the pouch, but they opened the pouch to the best of their ability and then laid out the tahrah. This is true where you have decomposition, severe decomposition or trauma. You just lay out the tahrah over the body in the order that you normally do, even if it's going to get dirty. You just lay it out, And if you put on earth from Eretz Yisrael, you would do that. If you use egg and vinegar, you would do that. If you can put the Chevra on, you do that. And then you just lay out the tahrah. But you want to make sure that the pouch is extremely open. Either you can tuck it under, or you can even cut away a part of it, so that as long as nothing is leaking, okay, I'm not talking about Jacob Kreutzfeld necessarily, but just any decomposition, whatever it is, at least the body is as exposed as possible. Now, sometimes the funeral directors will give you a hard time about opening a pouch that has a bad odor, okay? The answer to that is the following. You take 4 boxes of baking soda, and you put 1 box in every corner of the urn. You then go out and buy the cheapest coffee grounds you can find, okay? Not talking about instant coffee, I'm talking about ground coffee, okay? At the Dunkin' Donuts or wherever you can get it, the cheaper you can get it, the better. And then you want to put about 1 pound of these coffee grounds on either side of the body. Now, how do you make sure? The problem is if you're going to pour coffee grounds into the urn, it's going to be, they're going to move the urn, and you're going to hear the sound of grounds running along the bottom of the urn, which you don't want to do. So here's what you do. Take this cloth. That's what we do. I don't know what else there is to do. You take a plastic bowl. Maybe if you get a paper bowl, it wouldn't be too terrible. What we do is we take this and we just make a little bowl out of it. So we tie this end, okay? Probably make a knot. Certainly you can make a bow, okay? I don't know if anyone was here this afternoon. And then you take, and then, okay, I'm sorry. It wasn't nice. And then we make another one at the other corner. Okay. Now what you have is a bowl. You've fashioned a little bowl that doesn't make any noise. You fill it with coffee grounds, put one on one side of the body, put the other one on the other side of the body. The coffee grounds and the baking soda will draw the smell. I can't tell you how many funeral directors that fought us tooth and nail were amazed at how the smell basically disappeared overnight. Okay, so we do a tahrah in the evening, and by the next morning, they were actually able to move the urn into the chapel. Okay, certainly if it's a graveside service, it's going to work. But whatever it is, it's something that you should be aware of. You should never agree to do a tahara in a closed pouch. It is a terrible disservice to the person that you are burying, because in essence, they are not benefiting of the Ikul HaBosar, the body's return to the earth, which is an extremely important part of what we do for the person. Yeah.
Rabbi Zohn, one thing that we have encountered funeral homes that were very adamant that we should not open the pouch. So one thing that I've tried to do is just cut the zipper so that it can't, after we're gone, be zipped back up.
Yeah. Well, you could do that again as a real b'diavad. But I would try to open it if at all possible. I'll tell you, we have offered, in cases that were extreme, to go out to the cemetery and after the levaya, open the pouch, at least one member of the Chevra Kadisha to go out to the cemetery and open the pouch right before the funeral. Okay, so that at least you will accomplish that, where the person will not be left in a situation where they will never return to the earth. So we've done that in those situations on a number of occasions. But by and large, if there's any way to convince them to let it be done, it's best. Okay.
Question?
Yeah.
Is there any advantage when you have a situation where the body is in a very difficult shape, whether there's a lot of liquid, skin is very...
Those are all very different things, but okay.
Right. If to create almost like a body bag, if an individual, it's like almost putting the body into its own, like a sleeper, like a onesie for like a baby, as if we created. There were times we created like a garbage bag for each leg. We created as much coverage.
We're going to talk about that. So
okay,
let's move on. That's different kinds of
question about the Reviat down.
What
Does a Reviat down look like? How do we
3
distinguish?
ounces a dozen, approximately. If you think it might be 3 ounces, that's a review. Yes.
When you had
That's what Rosh shared.
when you had the pouch that had a lot of liquid blood in it,
We didn't get to that. Let's get to that. We're going to get to that. Now, I want to start, again, so we got to the really difficult cases, what we do with the really difficult cases, okay? Let's talk about cases that are much more common. Let's start with an autopsy, okay? I have to kind of work our way back to common, normal things, okay? An autopsy generally comes in two parts. There is the autopsy of the head, which usually is an incision from the back of the ear to the back of the other ear, okay? And it's usually sewn, not very well, but sewn, okay? Sometimes the skull inside is loose, but it's manageable. The first thing you want to do when you come across that kind of a situation, and especially if it's a situation where you are going to try to clean the blood and at least dress the body, even though you're not going to be able to pour Tisha Kabin over the body. The first thing you want to do is take a chuck, like this, and place it under the head. So you want to put it, this chuck unfortunately is not a very good example. Most chucks have a seam. Most chucks look like this when you open them. They have a seam. So you want to put it under the head with the seam running along the back, horizontally, so that if the body is resting, the head is resting on this chuck, if any blood comes out of the head, it's going to stay inside the chuck. It's not going to go running down the table. You're in control now. There's no blood going to run down the table. You don't have to worry about it. Okay? So that's the first thing you want to do, so that the head is now controlled. Of course, you want to remove any blood under the chuck before you put the chuck down. You want to make sure it's on a clean surface, and then put the head right on this. Okay? And then you will continue working on the body to clean it. Same process. Dry cloth, damp cloth, dry cloth, damp cloth. And the goal would be to start in the same order. Clean the face as much as possible. The head, you're not going to be able to clean the hair in the process in which I showed you when you have an open skull. It's just not possible because there's going to be continuous bleeding and you can't stop that bleeding, okay? So you're going to basically give up on the hair unless it's just to clean up blood that might be running, that might be really wet. So you want to just bring it to a point where the blood is in the hair but it's not running anywhere, okay? And then I would just continue washing the body with a damp cloth, a dry cloth, a damp cloth, a dry cloth, so that you clean the entire body as best as possible. And then you're able to dress the body. We talked earlier about not raising the legs specifically in those situations. And you can generally dress the body. When it comes to the chest, okay, it's very possible that as you turn the body, you may have to deal with the chest, okay? And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the point is, again, you want to clean the body, you want to be able to dress it. When it gets to the point where you need to dress the head, you would put a chuck, you can even take that same chuck if it's not been too dirty, okay? And you could place it around the head and form a bonnet with the chuck, just form, sorry about this, form a bonnet over the head so that the blood will be contained in that bonnet. You can put some tape around it, but at least you'll be able to put the tahrah over the head without getting it dirty, because the head is inside that bonnet. And then clean the body to the best of your ability. When you get to dressing, you would want to take a chuck and place it over the incision of the chest so that it will not dirty the tahrah. And again, you have to remember that you want to not raise the legs too much. One rule with autopsy, never pack, okay? The lower part of the body. You never pack rectally, because the last thing you want to do is break the last piece of intestine that's there. The last, you want it inside the chest. All the organs have either been removed or cut. If there's a little bit of left of the lower intestine, the lower bowel, okay, so that the blood isn't gushing out, but you don't want to pack it and then go right into that opening and all the blood's going to come gushing out. So you'd never pack rectally in an autopsy situation, okay? And what you want to do is clean it, with a damp cloth, whatever it takes to just clean it. And then you can put a piece of the cotton that we would normally pack with into the crease. And in those instances, I would almost always use a diaper, not a diaper, but a chuck as a diaper. Just put it underneath so that if it does bleed, as you're putting it into the urine, or even later, it's not going to dirty the tahrah, but it's certainly not going to come running out and drip out of the urine. So that's something to put in as a precaution. When you are putting this body into the urine, or when you're moving this body onto the table, you always want to keep the body as straight as possible so that there is no pressure on the lower bowel. And if you're putting it in, hold the pelvic area, hold the buttock together. You want to keep it together so that you're not putting any pressure on the lower bowel. Okay? Those are rules generally for autopsy.
That's why you're not using you're only using a chuck to cover it, you're not using a diaper, because then you have to lift the leg?
No, the chuck, you're going to have to lift the leg the same as a diaper. We talked about diapers and chucks earlier, which is why chucks are better than diapers. Diapers the same as a chuck, I just prefer a chuck. Okay? Yeah.
What about using, because I've been involved in Taharas where they started on the operating table. So they have this massive sealant tape. Can you use that?
It's not going to work. No, it's much too big for that kind of a thing. It's not. We don't have that. I wouldn't even know how to possibly apply that, but that's not for the Tahara process. I'm not sure if I know exactly what you're talking about. I think it's what I have seen a number of times. It's like a very thick kind of like almost like a gluey kind of a thing.
No, it's
You're talking about Tegaderm, like a very thin plastic?
the plastic with the seal around it really seals it.
That's much too big for it. It's not going to work for an autopsy. It's too big. It's too big. It's not going to work. Okay? First of all, we don't have that. You talk about this. You talk about Tegaderm. They come in different sizes. Okay? It's not going to. I don't think it's going to work for an autopsy. It's just too big, and if there's really a problem, it's not going to hold. Okay? Now. All right, so that's how I would deal with an autopsy. The goal, again, would be to clean it as best as possible and to dress it and put it into the urine. Now, let's talk about blood that comes from the mouth and the nose. Okay, so we're starting again from the head. We've talked about blood in the hair, and very often the blood in the mouth and the nose is what's making the hair full of blood. So you want to control that even before you're going to start cleaning the head. Okay, we're not talking about an autopsy, it's just talking about blood that's coming from the mouth and nose. Now what we talked earlier today, that always maintaining the head higher than the rest of the body, particularly we have that kind of, any kind of flow, you want to make sure that the head is higher because that will allow whatever is in the chest or the nose and the mouth to drain. Okay, that's really the main reason why you want to do that. Okay, now, to pack the nose, okay, we would take some of the combine dressing, some of the, what we call Webril, and you would make take a very small piece and make a little ball, okay, and you would put it up the size of a pea, let's say, insert it in the nose to the bridge, which is the tightest point, and then I would take another piece that is a little bit bigger than that, okay, and I would put that into the outer nose up to that point, and I would put mancels on the side that is going in up against the other one so that it will hold against that, and if any blood comes through, it will thicken it, okay, and keep it. I would not pour mancels into the nose, but I would put some mancels on that edge and then put it in. You could insert it with a clamp, okay, a hemostat, or even with a toothpick, whatever it is, just being careful not to injure the body. That is how I would pack the nose on both sides. The mouth is a little different. Now, by the way, let me say very clearly that if what is coming out of the nose and the mouth is fluid, not blood, let it flow. There's absolutely, you want fluids that are putrid, even if was initially blood. I mean, years ago, people had radiation. Now we don't see it that much. But radiation very often was like black fluid, okay? And you knew it might have been blood initially, whatever it was, it's digested blood, call it whatever you want. It would flow sometimes for a very long time. No reason to save that, okay? But if it's, so fluids, let it flow. And if you turn the body in which we showed you so that the body's on its side, then it would flow even better. Let it flow, okay? But if what's flowing is blood, you can't do that, then you want to pack it. And the way I would do it is there's a tendency to feel that you want to pack the mouth right down the middle. It's not the way you pack the mouth. You pack the mouth by taking a piece like this, or even a little smaller, make a little head to it, and pack it along the side of the mouth, along the teeth, so that it goes to the back of the mouth. That's where the blood generally will stem from. That's how it generally will travel into the mouth. You want to do that as far down as you can, and then put whatever's left over the front. Do the same thing on the other side. If you need to, you tuck it in a little bit. That's it. You will almost always, and again, never say never, but you will almost never have a problem afterwards. Okay? Again, keeping the head raised so that you're minimizing the amount of fluids. When you pump the head up and down and you play with it a lot, you're pumping up fluids. Every time you go down, you're closing the airway. Every time you go up, you're opening the airway. You're creating a pumping action, which you don't really want to do. So you want to keep the head steady, preferably closed. Once you pack it, there should not be a problem. Okay? That's how you pack the mouth and the nose, and it should be no problem. You will occasionally find bleeding from the eye. You will find that particularly if a person was a donor. Okay, they removed the eye. You will sometimes find like a plastic piece cap over the eye that has like little bumps on it so the eyelid sticks to it. But sometimes when they do that, you will still find blood flowing through the eye. Let me tell you that that blood is flowing through the corner. Inner corner, usually the inner corner. What you want to do is take literally a speck of this with a drop of Moncell's, and literally with the edge of a toothpick, just insert it into the corner of the eye, and it will generally stop the bleeding.
And they need to remove that plastic?
No, I would not remove the plastic. Okay, so that's what I would leave. Okay. Now, sometimes the plastic has nothing to do with the cornea. Sometimes it just has with the removal of the eye. Sometimes that plastic is just done by funeral directors who are making the face look a little better. In order to close the eye, they will use that plastic. That can be removed. But I would be careful with that. Okay? Now, so those are things you should be aware of. Now, let's talk about, let's move down. We're talking about a tracheostomy. Okay? It's basically, it's a hole in the center of the chest. This dummy actually has the hole. It's just a hole right here. Consider it a man-made mouth. So whatever you do with the mouth is what you want to do with this, okay? I would, if it's what's flowing out of it is fluids, let it flow. If what's flowing out of it is blood, you want to pack it, okay? Just like you pack the mouth, you want to pack this. How to do that, we'll talk about in 1 minute. But first, before we do that, you want to remove the tube that's in this tracheostomy, just as you would remove the tube that might be in the mouth. You have an intubation tube, and by the way, just so you know, when a person dies, we generally instruct the funeral homes, or I'm sorry, the hospitals or the nursing homes, not to remove anything. Our recommendation to hospitals and nursing homes is if somebody dies, let everything stay inside. Let the Chevra Kadisha deal with it, because what they're going to do is, first of all, discard it. Second of all, it might continue bleeding, like that case we had in that pouch where I told you the Chevra Kadisha guy was there. It was a ton of blood for no reason, okay? At one time, after AIDS, we actually were working with New York State to get them to make it mandatory, not to remove anything so that there wouldn't be a danger of proliferation of AIDS, because it was through blood that it was, it was going to be contagious. We wanted to make sure there'd be less fluids, less blood. So we got pretty far. Never became law, but many of the hospitals actually did adopt that. But the fact is that that is something to know. So when you have an intubation tube, that's the one place where I would remove it. And the reason is because it will distort the mouth. One of the things we do when someone dies is close the mouth. If you can have an intubation tube that's going to stay there, then it will distort the mouth. It will be very difficult to ever fully close it, and even if you do, it'll be distorted. So that's the one thing we recommend you remove. However, when you're dealing with an intubation tube, you will usually find that there is a bubble at the end of the tube that goes down, and that bubble will only collapse, that little balloon will only collapse when you cut another little balloon that's coming out of the mouth. There is always, when you're going to have an intubation, when you have a tube that goes down into the throat, whether it's here or whether it's here, there is usually a thin plastic tube that comes out with a little balloon at the end. If you cut that tube, it allows the inner balloon to collapse, and then it pulls out. So now, what you want to do, again, let's get back to a situation where you have a tube coming out of the trachea, okay? And what you want to do is clean the area around it first, so that if there's any kind of tape or betadine or whatever it might be, you want to clean it. You want to snip the stitches that are holding it in place so that it's removable. You want to cut that thin tube to allow the balloon inside to collapse, and then you want to pull it out. At this point, it's fine. At this point, when it collapses, you want to remove it. If it has blood on it, you would save it. If it doesn't have blood on it, never mind. If it doesn't have blood on it, then we will just, if it doesn't have blood on it, then just throw it away. But if it has blood on it, you would save that blood and put it in. Now, you're packing this. Okay, we talked about packing the mouth. Here it's a little bit different. I would, again, use the same web roll. I would make a little head. I would pack it. You don't have to pack that far down because it's not that big a problem. I wouldn't go that far as I would in the mouth. It's not as deep. Just go as far as you feel is necessary. Make a little head to it. And here, if it's blood, then I will possibly put a little bit of Mancell's on the outside right on top, so again, to stop the bleeding. However, what if it's fluids? And we let it flow, and now we're dressing the body, and there's still fluids coming. Now you can't let it flow because it's going to dirty the tahrah. So now you want to pack it the same way. Instead of putting little Mancell's on, by the way, when you put Mancell's on it at this stage, especially when you get to the dressing part, you can't just leave it because the Mancell's is going to draw into the tahrah. So you want to put a piece of tape over it so that it will not dirty the tahrah. Okay, you want to make sure it's as dry as possible, put a piece of tape over it. Okay, that is very kedai. However, when you're dealing with fluids and Mancell's is not going to work, then you pack it the same way. Always pack below the surface of the skin. You don't want the cotton sticking up above the level of the skin. You want it below. But here, if you can't put Mancell's on, then here is where you deal with crazy glue. That's where you would take some glue. Now this is just one kind of glue called Gorilla Super Glue. But you could take any crazy glue. Okay, and I would just put a few drops onto the cotton, not on the body. Never put glue on the body. I'm going to say never, but don't put glue on the body, just on the cotton.
Why?
What?
Why?
Because very often it actually, it's hard to take off. It doesn't always work and stop anything. It's also, you know, sometimes it gets stuck to things, whatever it is. I'm not a big fan. Also, chatzitza, and it's not necessary. Okay, I would just pour the glue, not pour, but drip the glue onto the cotton. And then if you need a little more, I would just take a tiny drop more just on top, just to give it a little extra strength, put a little bit right on top, and another little bit of glue. It will not be a problem there. Okay, and there you probably don't even have to put a piece of tape over it because it will not come through. and cells will come through. This probably will not come through. If you want to, there's no big
And
deal.
the glue won't be a problem with the tahrah?
No, it's, again, you're putting the glue on the cotton, which is below the surface of the skin. So it will not come in contact with the tahrah, and it'll dry. By the time you put the tahrah on, the glue is going to be dry. Now, that's how I would deal with this. The same concept applies to many different forms of packing. You remove a colostomy bag, okay? Colostomy bag is the same thing as the rectum. Just consider it a man-made rectum, okay? You're going to remove the glue that holds it in place, and if it's dirty, you will clean it. Sometimes there's like a mucus on it, you just remove that. Nothing wrong with it. Pouring water, it's not going to fill the body with water. Nothing happens. Usually the intestine is right up against the body, filling the opening. And if there's dirt coming, pack it the same way you pack rectally. Just take the same piece of, like we talked about this afternoon, just make the right size of piece of cotton, insert it, and let it stay. Where you might have to deal with it is when you're dressing the body. If it's still somewhat oozing, you may want to put a piece of cotton, or even better, probably a piece of blue pad. If you're a little fancier, you may want to take Tegaderm and cover it. But any of those things will generally, as long as you feel that it's not going to come through, then that's sufficient. So that's,
I'm sorry, we've discarded the colostomy bag?
you've absolutely discarded the colostomy bag, okay? Now, the one problem with the colostomy that could be a problem, and it's not very common, is if the colostomy was just done.
Yeah.
And it's still bloody, there's still blood, it's still fresh. So then, first of all, you might have a piece holding it in place so that it doesn't fall back in. You may have to remove that, even if you leave that, but you can again clean the intestine of the blood using a damp cloth and then paint cells on it. And that will generally just stop the bleeding, okay? It's been, yeah.
And then talk about feeding tubes.
We're gonna get to it. In fact, that is the next thing. We've been talking the fact that it was really out of order that I went to the colostomy. But a feeding tube is a tube that generally comes out right next alongside the navel, a little bit up, but it's generally on the side. And you can tell it looks like a feeding tube. Sometimes it's like a, sometimes it's more of a plastic, like a rubbery tube, sometimes more of a plastic kind of a thing. But whatever it is, I would first of all cut it. Just be very careful, because sometimes what you think is a feeding tube, or it is a feeding tube, it has like liquid in it. And when you cut it, it actually can shoot right up into the ear. Be careful, don't bend over it when you're doing this. Not a good idea. But I would stay away, cut it, let it flow, if it's flowing, until it stops, and then you pull it out. Now, the problem with pulling out a feeding tube, patients, by the way, do it all the time, which is why, in order not to have them do it, they put a bubble at the bottom, which is solid. It doesn't collapse. Even though the water may come through, or whatever comes through and it stops running, that bubble still sits below the surface of the skin. You have a little opening, and you have a bubble underneath it that's solid plastic, or solid rubber, actually. Okay? You just need to have a little bit of, what I call a chutzpah, a little bit of omets, a little bit of inner strength. Just yank it out. It's not, do it gently, but give it a pull, and it comes out. It does not injure the body. I've removed hundreds of them. There's never an issue of it hurting the body.
So we had a situation where the feeding tube, I think it was a feeding tube, it got cut, and the leader pushed it in so that it was then under the skin, but we ended up then with what seemed like an endless supply of peritoneal fluid.
So let me tell you that that could happen whether you pull it out, whether you push it in. It had nothing to do with the fact that you pushed it in. It would have happened the other way. And what I would do in that case is, foul smelling as it usually is, as you turn the body, okay, this is all done, by the way, in the survey part of the Tahara process. So as you turn the body to wash, let it flow. If you have the body in the right place, it will be flowing down alongside the table. It will just keep flowing and flowing and flowing. And by the time you finish turning both ways, I would say in 90 98% of the cases, it will have stopped flowing. Okay? So it'll be fine, but it is uncomfortable, there is a bad odor to it. There's nothing you can do about that. But why should this person be buried with it? So it flows, and it takes some time. Okay? What you end up doing before you dress the body, pack it, same way we talked about the tracheostomy, and glue, and it will work. It will stop the flow. Okay? No matter what happens afterwards, when you dress it, it's fine. Okay? Turn the body as little as possible afterwards. You don't generally need to. If you remember, we're talking about post-Tahara. At that point, all you need to turn is enough to dry the back, okay? And then you could generally, but it will not come through the crazy glue. If you pack it with that, below the surface of the skin, put on some crazy glue, it will hold, it'll be fine. But let it drain, okay? If you let it drain, it will work, okay?
Better to pull than to let it go back in.
Absolutely. It's not going to make a difference as far as how much fluid is going to come or
Right,
not come.
just saying,
Nothing to do with that. Why not pull it out? That's the right thing to do, is to remove it, okay? Now, if you have a tube coming out of the side, somebody asked about this earlier, which has like a bloody-ish, whitish fluid in it. It's like a mixture of fluids and some dam. Now, we don't save dam that's mixed with all kinds of fluids. That is after death, okay? So let it flow. I will tell you that when you cut, again, always, in all these things, clean the area first, cut the stitches, and then pull. Do not pull out anything until you've cleaned the area. So you want to do that, you cut the stitches, you pull it out. First of all, when you're pulling a tube out of the side, I would pull it out while the body's on its side. So you have gravity working in your favor. You're not going to put it out while it's on its lying flat on the table. It could start gushing heavily, although I will tell you from experience, usually not. But let's say it does. If you have the body on its side, then it's under control. And then again, if necessary, pack it, same cotton, put on the glue at the end, and that's fine. Okay, it's not going to be blood that's coming, it's usually these fluids. It's a drainage tube. Remove them. Why should a person be buried with that? But I will tell you, years ago, people used to come out of open heart surgery with these huge tubes coming out of the chest, looked like a horseshoe. They would come out of the chest and they were filled with fluid. And people were terrified of removing them. And the amazing thing was that every time you removed it, the fluids receded and you never saw them again. But it was drawn into the tubes. And once the tubes were removed, it receded. And that was the end of it. Yeah.
I know this is like an estimation. What is your idea of a decent amount of time to let fluids drain, like, 10 minutes?
Listen, so I will tell you that when you are doing this during the survey, and then you're washing the body, you're going through the entire process of washing the body. You should be careful not to pour more fluids into there. When you're washing, don't pour any water in there. But you turn the body both ways, the way in which I showed you. I would say by the time you are done with the rechitza of the back in both instances and the front and everything else, it should be pretty much done. Okay, there are rare cases where it might be a little bit more than that, but by that time, it generally is done. If a body is properly turned, it should be okay, yeah.
Okay, so now the next thing is central lines and chemopores.
Where do we get to it? That's, you're keeping up, okay? Okay, so now, that is really where we're at this point, okay? So we know what to do with openings of fluids, drainage of that type. Just where it's not blood, you want to just pack it, and you want to put some glue on if you feel it's necessary. There are times we packed it did not put glue on. We saw what happened. After a while it was fine, we left it, especially with feeding tubes. Sometimes you pull out a feeding tube and there's nothing coming, and there's no need to pack every hole. But if you see that it is coming, then this is the way to deal with it, yeah.
When she asked about the time that it takes, you said, well, it should stop by the time you do all the washing, the left and the right. So what I hear you saying is, while you're washing,
The water is, dirt is coming,
you're
right?
letting this stuff
That's
come
right.
out.
And that's 100% correct. Again, if the body's in the center of the table, usually it's away from the body, but yeah, you may have to just rinse it down when you're done, putting it down again. Yeah, absolutely. All right, you may have to do that. Okay, now, let's talk about puncture sites, okay, intravenous tubes. My recommendation is to remove all of those tubes. There are a couple of variations that are a little bit uncomfortable. Let's talk about that. The first and most common of these places is in the neck, okay, sometimes in the groin, okay, and they are tubes that are going, they're called intravenous, which means they go into the vein. I was lecturing somewhere and I left my stuff here and I came back, most of these were gone, but we still have some very important ones. So let's just make the point. I'd say this is typical of what you will find in the neck, okay? This is more likely in the groin. It's a little bit thicker. Some of them are rather thick. This is about the same, okay? They go into these places. Now, what you need to realize again is you're going to clean the area extremely well before you begin doing anything to it, okay? So you're going to lift it and you're going to clean all the tape and the betadine and all the junk that's around it so that it's ready for the Tahara. Just, there's a tube in there. Cut the stitches, okay? Now, should have prepared this a little better. Hold on, let's see if we can get this to do its thing so we don't have to go through the whole process. It's a very talented dummy. Okay. This is Mansell's. They call it a dummy for a reason. I'm just kidding. So now this is Mansell's. You shake it. This is Q-tips. You want to fluff them up like I told you. You want to insert it into the Mansell's. Have it ready, okay? Even before you let me tell you, when you first put this into the Mansell's does not absorb that well. You need to go in a few times, fluff it so that it absorbs, but every time you go in, it absorbs a little bit more. But you want it to be fully absorbed with Mansell's, okay? So that it has a lot in it, okay? Now we'll get back. Okay, so we have this tube coming out of here, okay? The first thing you want to do is realize that this tube, what's called an intravenous tube, if you remember your biology books, okay, there are veins that go straight, they kind of go from the shoulders towards the center of the chest into the aorta, okay? What you want to do is press about half an inch to an inch away from the puncture site so that you're clamping the vein. By doing that, you're pressing against the collarbone, against a rib, whatever you find, just about an inch away. There's a lot of things to press against. Just apply pressure so that the blood is not going to be coming through the vein. The blood that's there's no heart pumping. It's just blood that's sitting in the vein. And whatever it might be will push it out. Maybe a little pressure from within, but usually it's just gravity will do it. Okay, so you want to press against that vein, figure going towards the center of the chest to the puncture site, about half an inch to an inch away. Just with your thumb, apply pressure. Then you want to do one more little thing, which is pull a little bit. A little tug on the skin so that you're also closing the puncture site, because when you pull the skin, it closes the puncture site naturally. Okay? When all that is in place, again, I'm not the same person. I'm not going to be holding the head at this point. The body part would be lying. It's not even going to be standing. I'm doing this so you can see it. As soon as you remove it, with that pressure, nothing will come instantly. You have a second. Take that solution. Go into the puncture. It's not just dab it on top. You want to go into the puncture site as much as possible so that as much Mansell's will go into the blood vein into the vein, and that will stop the bleeding, okay? Now, if you have a person that has blood thinners, or a person's very heavy, there's a lot of pressure from within. The fact that you have this fluffed up cotton full of red cells, if you see that it's still coming, sometimes you'll see a little bit of blood like bubbling up, just take the edge of one of those toothpicks that we showed you, that you clean the nails, and just insert it. You could sometimes even do it just with the stick itself, if it's a bigger opening, okay? And just remove the cotton into the puncture site and leave it there. So you just tuck it in the drop, that will never bleed again, okay? That will always work. So whether it's a puncture here, or it's a puncture here, you're going to think the same way, just going this way. So you're going to go above the puncture site, a half an inch away, tug a little bit, and as you remove it, you go right into it with Mansell's. And if it's a bigger opening, it's actually easier in a certain sense to get in. And if you see it still keeps coming, just take some of that Mansell's and just push in some of the cotton, and it will not bleed again. Okay? And then you go about doing your full Tahara, which you have to be careful about when you're dressing the body, and you have some of that cotton still sitting there with some Mansell's in it, it will dirty the tahrah, so you want to clean it. You'll see some of these cloths that I've been demonstrating with have little yellow stains on it because they were once used as a cloth that we did a Tahara with, and we dabbed that spot when we were drying the body so that it wouldn't dirty the tahrah, so this has Mansell stains on it. But that's the point. The point is you want to just clean it, if necessary put a piece of tape over it before you dress the body. That's how you deal with punctures here, punctures there. It's the same thing, okay? Now, when you have a port, that is much more complicated because some of these ports will really bleed very, very, very heavily. Sometimes these ports are in the inner arm over here, okay? They're in different places. Sometimes the easiest thing is, especially if the ports are not easily removable, to pack them, sometimes it's the plastic that's open, to pack into it is very, very difficult. Sometimes if you can remove it, it's actually easier to put something inside with Mansell's and stop it. What very often we have done is actually make a tourniquet above that, tightly, so that it doesn't bleed, just to control the bleeding. But if you are not sure, leave it. Okay? If you are afraid, what?
Leave the tube in.
I would say or at least leave the port in place. Okay? If you have no way of removing it.
What does the port look like?
What?
What does the port look like?
It usually looks like a plastic with a hole inside it. No, isn't that what
The ones I've seen look like little boxes that are sort of
Yeah, that's up here.
attached to the chest wall.
Right.
I'm not, see, I've been doing tires for the last 2 years, I'm not sure that I've seen those. No, so what does it look, what is the,
It's under, right, it's under the skin. It's under the skin, but it's like a solid box.
so what's coming out of it?
But it's there to give like nutrients and medication and like IVs. It's like a multiple type of.
It's got tubes and stuff coming out of it.
So just right.
If it's tubes that look like this, no? Doesn't look like this?
No.
So what does it look like? I'm not sure that I know what you're looking at.
It sits here, but it's inserted, they put it
If it's under the skin, there's not, if it's under the
Under the
skin,
skin.
It's under the skin.
But the
Then you-
tubes come
It's
out.
inserted under the
You
skin.
can pull it back.
Could you
I'm
pull
a
it?
nurse, so you can pull back and you can pull out the needle under this, it's like a mesh metal under the skin. And then when you want to access it, you put in the needle. But then when you want to de-access, like in the hospital, if you're done with an infusion, you pull back.
you pull the needle out.
You can pull the
Does it
needle.
actually have a needle at the end of it?
Yes.
I'm familiar with that. That's fine. You remove it, there's no problem with that. You're not removing what's under the skin, you're
Right,
just
no, the
removing
mesh
that.
is-
And that's not gonna be a problem. I'm talking about something else. And maybe this is dialysis related. There are ports inside the arm that are very, very, they bleed extremely heavy. Maybe it's a dialysis thing, I'm not sure. It's not dialysis.
No, it goes directly to the heart.
So then what's the problem with removing the needle?
It just bleeds a lot.
Not from what I have seen.
Not that.
Okay.
Well, you're talking about the PICC line, aren't you talking about the PICC line?
Yeah. you're talking about this piece, when you remove this needle, okay, you have to be very careful, whoops, because the needle itself is very dangerous. So what we will generally do is, along this tube that you pull out with it, there's usually a hole that you can put the needle right into and save it, so that if there is any blood there, you can save it. But if not, you could just discard it. But we have not found that when you remove that needle, that it bleeds very heavily. I don't think that at all. If that's what you're talking about, it's not how I understood it, but if that's what you're talking about, then it's not a problem to remove at all. Okay, you just have to be careful with the needle, it's very dangerous, you can stick yourself with it. Okay, but that's, I don't find that to be a problem. If that's what it is, that's not the problem. What I'm talking about more is the ports that you have over here, okay, that sometimes, what's that?
A PICC line.
It's a PICC line that sometimes could be very, very hard to stop the bleeding. We have been able to stop it, and I said sometimes it helps actually make a tourniquet until you pack it well so that you can stop it. And again, you could put cells in with cotton, okay, and it will stop it eventually. Okay, also for this, some Tegaderm might help as well. Okay, that's what I thought you were referring to. Okay, now there is one type of tube that comes usually out of, actually more than one type of tube, that comes more out of the center of the chest, okay? And it's usually plastic rather than, it's rubber rather than, I don't know if this is really rubber, it's plastic, but it's a rubbery plastic rather than a tube like this or this, okay? Those type of, this unfortunately attaches itself to the aorta, to wherever it is that it goes inside. What's that? It's not the aorta?
No, I'm saying, I don't think I
But it attaches itself. Now, the way to know it is you pull at it, it's not coming, okay? What you want to do in those cases, if you have, there are two options. Option number one is if you have enough of this tubing so that you can pull it out, okay? You can pull on it, it's not coming, but there's enough of this, there's enough length that you can knot it against itself, then you could take a clamp, a hemostat, and put it right up against the skin, pull up a drop, clamp it, okay, and then just knot it against itself as close to the skin as possible and leave it. That's one way of dealing with it, okay? Another way of dealing with it, if you don't have enough room to make a knot, or even if you do, is to lift it, get some cotton, or even a Q-tip, depending on the size of the hole, okay, saturated with cells, bring it up above the level of the skin, like pull on it, cut it, so that it'll naturally recede, and then just pack the hole with cotton. So if it is bleeding, it's going to bleed internally, it's not going to bleed externally, it will not come out. You understand what I'm saying? Just pull it up, cut it, let it go back, and then you don't have to deal with it. Any questions on that? That's cool. I think they call it a Broviac. There's also a Hickman. Okay, those are the types of tubes that don't pull out, but as I said, they are generally in the center of the chest. They're not in the neck or the groin. It's in the center of the chest. Okay? Now, bed sores, sometimes they are actually very simple. Sometimes they're just black. And there's like a very heavy, like scab over the bed sore, usually on the hip. Leave it, don't bother it, it won't bother you. Just be careful. Again, note it in the survey. Make sure everybody is aware of it. Leave it. When you have a bed sore that is open, okay, first of all, I would remove bandages. I'm a big believer in removing bandages. You don't want to be an ostrich. You don't want to be afraid, because very often what looks terribly frightening is nothing. It's just a little torn skin or something, but they put a big bandage on it, or it's already healed, okay? So I would always remove it. If you don't remove it, you don't know. You're going to pour some water and suddenly a gush of blood's going to come out. You have no idea what's there. Sometimes it's just torn skin where a little bit of cells would solve the problem. Okay? You want to know what you're dealing with. You can always do better than what's bandaged there now. So just remove the bandage. If you have a really large, deep bed sore, there isn't very much that you can do with it. However, you can usually do a tahara, particularly where you're not using a mikveh, okay?
Particularly if what?
A deep,
Particularly if you're not using a
You're not
mikveh.
using a mikveh.
right, particularly if you're not using a mikveh. Now, I would remove whatever bandages are on top. I would also remove whatever packing is in there, even though usually it's foul smelling and it's not blood, it's kind of mixed with all kinds of other things. I would sometimes throw it away. If it's really red, I would save it, okay? But if it's putrid and it's mixed with, sometimes it's almost gangrenous, it's green, whatever it might be, throw it away. Now what you need to know is when you have a bed sore, the opening is not really the size of the bed sore. The bed sore is much bigger than the opening. What the opening is just where the skin is completely worn away, but underneath it, there is a much larger area that is worn away, where the skin has been eaten away. So you want to pack it, again, using the same web roll. I would use a lot of Mancels, like almost saturate this Mancels, and insert it as deeply as you can around the perimeter as best as you can, okay? And just do that. It's not necessarily going to stop all the bleeding, but it will certainly slow the process. And then the goal would be to at least be able to do the tahara. So how you stop it, there are a lot of different ways. First of all, as I said, pack it. Second of all, you may want to put a piece of tegaderm, if you have a large enough piece to do it. You can dry the area around it, put a piece of tegaderm on it to cover it. Or you can take a piece of chuck, make your own little bandage that's completely watertight all around, place it over the size of the bed sore, and tape it where the skin is pretty normal. Just you have to dry it well first, and then you can put tape around it, and it will stay there, okay? If anything bleeds through, it will bleed into this, it will be fine. There are other things that you can do. You can take, not such a fancy piece, just take a piece of chuck, and what we sometimes will do is we will take a piece of sheet, longer than the body, around this chuck, and tighten it across the center. We've actually put people into the mikveh like this, where the plastic was held very tightly against the body as you poured the water.
Like a belt.
What? Like a belt, right, tightening it very tightly, and actually by putting it in the mikveh, we actually hold on to it and press down so it would keep it in place. Afterwards, you would have to take it off before you dress the body. I mean, if you put that on, or tegaderm, you can leave it. But if it's not, if it's just loose, you're just holding it in place, then before you dress the body, you may want to put on a chuck like this over the area just so that it's not going to dirty the tahrah, and then you dress them, okay? That's how I would deal with bed sores. The one problem with bed sores that are, in my opinion, insurmountable, although somebody told me it's worked with crazy food, it might, I'm not sure, is where the bone itself is bleeding. There are times when the bone itself is actually bleeding, and it's almost impossible to stop the bleeding. Mancels will generally not work. Almost nothing will work that I know of. Again, tegaderm is your best bet if you can cover it somehow. So even if it does bleed, it'll bleed into that. Or just something makeshift to just hold it, and then hopefully before you dress it, you'll be able to put on something that will protect it. But it's very, very difficult when you have that. Now let's talk about tearing skin. Now, if skin is torn in a very limited area, okay, sometimes it can be just one leg. Sometimes there's a leg that's gangrenoted, okay, but it's still attached, it hasn't been removed, and it has some blood or pus or whatever it is there. If there's real blood, I would try to save it. If not, I would probably just leave it. Before you wash the body, you're not going to wash that area. Certainly before the tahara, I would take a chuck, wrap the leg with the chuck so that you can pour water over it. Okay, before you dress the body, you would take off that chuck that you poured water over, and you would put on a fresh chuck. When I put on a chuck over an entire limb like that, okay, I would leave it open in the front. So when you put the tachrichim over it, at least it's not fully wrapping the body so that the earth will not get in, but usually it'll be fine, because what's on top is not going to do anything. As long as it's open and you can pull the tachrichim over it, very often that's sufficient, okay? If you have a situation where, again, one leg is weeping with fluids, but other areas are fine, I would do the same thing. I would put a chuck over it so that it'll contain as much of the fluids as possible. However, if you have a situation where the entire body is weeping, okay, sometimes you will open a pouch and you will find a gallon of fluids at the foot of the pouch, okay? It's usually where a person has had water retention, okay? And literally every pore is oozing fluid. First of all, you can let that fluid wash away. But there, before you begin preparing the aron, you want to take a Shabbos tablecloth, like this, that's thin, larger than the size of the aron. You want to spread it out along the entire length of the aron, bringing it up just a little bit along the sides, and then preparing the aron, and let the body lie in this aron that is with that has this plastic to protect it. The last thing you want to do is have an aron sitting at the front of a chapel dripping fluids, okay? So you need to protect it. It's not in that. All of these things have the repercussion that funeral directors discourage Tahara because they're afraid of being embarrassed, because the Chevra Kadisha isn't sensitive to these issues. So you need to be sensitive to the issue, but it's also not covered for the person that's there. So you want to make sure that you do that. Yes?
I'm a little confused. So how far can you go with something like that? Can to washing and to
If you go, so here's the rule. If you can wash without losing any skin or any blood, or any skin, especially if it's just skin, I would wash it. I would pat dry as best as you can. Once you're reaching a point where you're tearing skin or losing skin, you don't. Okay? Can you dress the body? The tachrichim are going to get wet very quickly, but I have no problem dressing the body as long as you're not tearing the skin, which is a problem because sometimes there are blisters. So what you may want to do is put on some of these over the worst areas, okay, and dress over this, but leave the rest of it exposed. Okay, so when you put it on, you might want to put it underneath the bottom so that when you're pulling up the tahrichem and pulling it down, you have something for the tahrichem to go over without tearing the skin. But in the front, I would leave it open. On top, I would leave it open, even if it's going to get wet. We know it's going to get wet, yes.
With sloughing skin, so when you turn the body and, the table has little bits of skin all over it. Save it.
Absolutely. Okay? If you start taking off any kind of bandaging, and you see the skin is beginning to come off with the bandage. Now sometimes, tegaderm is very often on the body. What we're using to stop the problem is very often on a blister on the hand. There's tegaderm, and if you start lifting it, sometimes the skin will come off. You know what you do? Take a Q-tip. Dip it into 100% acetone. Okay? And as you lift the plastic, just go underneath. It will dissolve the glue underneath it. The plastic comes right off without touching the skin at all. Okay? Extremely helpful. Sometimes that won't work. But if you have a situation where the skin is sensitive and you see that by lifting the tape you're starting to tear the skin, this will allow you to remove tape without tearing the skin. Okay?
Again, so question. We have a leg that is gangrene, it's really oozing and so on and so forth. Can I put a plastic bag over it and then dress?
Why a plastic? Why would you want to use a plastic bag if you have chucks?
So what's the advantage to the chuck
The
over?
advantage of the chucks is it's what people use in hospitals for normal people, for typical medical procedure, to stop oozing, to stop things from getting dirty. So why not use that? That's what we use.
I'll tell you what the problem would be. What I anticipate, what I had, the problem was, it was a lot of oozing, and therefore the chuck, I guess, unless I created like a seal at the bottom, or along throughout the chuck, I mean, I'd see myself then taping up a lot, wherever the chucks,
Trying to tape up for what, I don't know for what purpose. If you're talking about washing, you're not washing, you're talking about the Tahara pouring water,
no, I'm talking about the final dressing.
the final dressing, so it's gonna fill up with fluids inside the chuck. Why do you have to wrap it on top? I wouldn't want to wrap it on top. I would just pull the tahrah over it. It's not gonna be that much gushing of fluids that's gonna come up over the top. Just bring it up to the sides. I would leave a little bit of it open. You may want to put a piece of tape on top and the bottom, but the tahrah itself will hold it in place. Okay, or just maybe put a little piece of tape on the top and on the bottom so that it'll hold it together. It's, I would not, again, Reb Moshe's guideline for us was whatever you can do that is similar to what is done in a hospital setting for normal patients is what I would like to do. We don't bring in garbage bags. We don't use the plastic coveralls that the funeral directors use with the rubber at the end that keeps it in place. All that is very, very stifling. Does not allow the body to deteriorate. Just use this, and if you can leave it open a little bit so that the body will get in, that's fine. All of this stuff inhibits the decomposition.
Right.
If you want to know what you're accomplishing, take a look at the Pella Yoetz on Kvura, and you'll understand. Okay? Just find the piece on Kvura, and you'll understand. Okay? It's every day that the body does not decompose is a tremendous tzar to the neshama. So why not give them that opportunity? Okay?
Fluids like trapped under the skin.
Under the skin, let it be there. If you're afraid of tear, by the way, when you have sometimes hanging blisters,
Right.
especially if you poured the water and they really got into this under the skin, you can puncture them.
Is it good to puncture it?
It's not kedai if you could manage to do things without puncturing it, but if it's going to puncture anyway, you'd rather puncture before you put on the tahrah rather than after you put on the tahrah. If you can put on a chuck and not have to puncture it, and you think it'll be fine, fine. But if you know it's going to puncture anyway, it's okay to puncture it. Just make a little hole in it, let the water come out, and then dress it. Okay, and generally with a blue pin under it. Okay, but that's generally what I would do. Now, what else? What? Nails. No, don't forget. Gel nails, basically, again, you need to notice it. The earlier you notice it, the better. You want to notice that the nails are there immediately, which is pretty hard to miss, okay? But you want to notice it. So you want to take a piece of cotton again, using the same cotton. Take a piece that's the size of a nail, maybe even a little bigger. Make it a nice piece that can saturate well. 100% acetone. Don't use nail polish remover. Use 100% acetone. I believe Rite Aid carries it. They used to anyway. But you can look for it online. You can order it 100% acetone. Saturate it, put it on the nail. Now go out and buy silver foil, the ones you pull up that has like the the towels, whatever they are, silver foil. Cut one of those into 4 parts, okay? And put the silver foil over the nail and twist it. Leave it there. Before you put the acetone on, if you have a little nail file, just file the nail very little bit. Just a little bit. Just enough so that you're creating a little place for the acetone to saturate just a little bit better. Okay, just file the nail down before you put the acetone on, then use that piece of silver foil, twist it, and leave it there. When you're finished with the entire rechitza, which usually will take 20 minutes or so, okay, it's usually the lengthiest part of the time, you can do it during the survey, while you're removing other things. As soon as you open the pouch, it's probably the first thing to look for. Leave it there. If it's more than a half hour, it's even better. But try a half hour, 20 minutes as a minimum. When you open it, you should be able to remove it. If you leave it there for 20 minutes or a half hour, it should come off. If not, you have to play with it a little bit, but it will come off. Okay? That's what I'm told. Okay? Men still don't have gel. I'm not waiting for them to start using it. But if that's what happened, but whatever, I've never dealt with it. But this is where I'm going. How did we find this out? For years, I used to tell people to just cut it to the size of a regular nail. and see if you can get off any of the color, but just leave it. You can't do anything about it. And then there's a woman who is very involved in Chevra Kadisha work, who works with us, and she told me that she is in elementary school, but one of her children, maybe actually grandchildren, now told her that one of the kids in high school came into high school with gel, and it was against the rules. So they put her in the office, and they brought out the acetone, and they put this on her nails, and it came off.
That's what they do in the beauty salons, so.
Well, I understand, but this person knew what to do, this principal. So this girl that broke all the rules had the schus of helping all the Chevra Kadisha know what to do with gel. Okay, so that's what we do. It should work. Again, if you give it time, if it's a half hour, use as much acetone as you need. Generally, that will do the trick. Okay? Harley, have a good night. Yeah, go on.
I have a general question on blood retention versus ways of stopping the blood. I've seen so many times you have a wound that's it becomes very difficult to stop bleeding. And should you go through all of the things in your head, where did this blood come from, how did it come, what could it be, versus the amount that could be lost, or versus simply taping it over, which is a chatzitza, which is going to be, do you have a preference for what to do?
Again, I would try to stop the bleeding first. If you can't absolutely do it, I don't really remember the time when we needed to just wrap and tape and pull to just control the blood. I think we're almost always able to stop it. So I don't think so. We have no issue with chatzitza that needs to be done. But I think we should try other measures first, and I think generally we have it under control pretty well, as a general rule. Yeah.
What about under a circumstance when you have a loose sleeve of skin, or maybe even a burn victim, where in the case of loose skin, it would pretty much just take off like a glove. So you don't have the circumstance where you can put a chuck underneath and not expect anything on top, because the top of the arm.
If you have to do the top, you do the top. If you have to wrap the entire arm in a chuck, you do so. But when that's to do the Tahara necessary. But when you're dressing it, then sometimes you can just leave one side of it open. If you put the chuck underneath and you dress over it, it will generally be fine. If you can dress it and leave it as unencumbered as possible, it's best. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, this is something we had like last year. Total skin donation.
Oh,
chest down.
nothing to do, but it also usually along with that is what they call a long bone donation, where the body is almost like a rag doll.
No,
It wasn't, it was just
the
skin. It's not, again, if you can put, if you can get down to the level of the skin and apply cells so that at least what's oozing is not blood.
No, there's nothing oozing. Because she lost all her blood and everything. But I'm saying this is what we did. Okay, because I called you and didn't get it, but I didn't have your cell phone number, so I called the office here. So I went online, I Googled. So somebody had done something like this. You just wash with the damn cloth what you can. No Tahara water, because the muscle was, all the pieces of muscle were then to come off.
No, there was stuff coming off from the body.
Yeah. And she had like a chuck from her diaphragm down. So what I did was we cut the inner coat and the outer coat to put it on like this, because we couldn't really lift her, because I was afraid that we lift like from her.
What do you mean by the inner coat and the outer coat of what?
The shirt.
Tahrah.
Oh, okay.
And so it was and so did everything superficially, just nodding and everything.
Again, if you can't really dress the body, then you lay it out. That's the way, that's what's brought down. You don't have to create a new pattern. There is a directive what to do. If you can't dress the tahrah, you lay it out. If there's no way to put on the tahrah without tearing skin, without what's called, even if you put a chuck on, it's not going to work on the front. So you can put a chuck on the back and then dress it fine. But if you can't even do that, then just lay out the tahrah. That's all. The goal would be, again, to be as minimum, to take her out of the pouch if that's possible.
Well, we had the pouch was open.
The pouch was open.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm saying it's good, so you open it, you cut away as much as you can. If you can take her out of the pouch and use a Shabbos tablecloth, I'd much rather do that. But if you're gonna injure the skin more, if you're gonna tear tissue, I wouldn't do any of that, okay? Now,
So in cases where there's oozing and you wanted to leave the chunk open when you're dressing, can't that compromise the tahrah?
it'll compromise the tachrichim, and then not necessarily, if nothing flows up. If the tachrichim are not directly on that skin, then it's fine. If you have it up along both sides, it's just open in the middle, it's fine, okay? Now, what else? Yeah,
Could you talk about a problem with feces when you just can't seem to stop?
we talked about it this afternoon. If you can't pack it, it's really because you're not packing properly 90% of the time. There are very unusual cases, I told you, maybe 1 in 100, where you really have just so much, sometimes people are just very backed up for a long period of time. There's also sometimes internal gases that are pushing out, but usually you will be able to clean it and stop it after a while. In those cases, you can use a hose to clean, okay? But at some point, you stop, you say at this point we can pack, and you try to pack. If you see that it doesn't hold, you may have to repack, and at the end, you may want to put a chuck under just in case. But you should be able, that is a very unusual case, okay? There are Chevra Kadisha that do internal cleansings all the time. That's not our minhag, okay? And we try not to do it unless we absolutely must to even clean it. So that's the way we leave it, okay? Would someone mind taking a picture of the, could use my cell phone, okay? Just my office is where it should be, because I'm not.
They don't really think that you're here.
No, they know I'm here, they know I'm here, they just want it for whatever publicity, if you think I know how to find my camera.
Rabbi Zohn, I got it here.
You took some, you can take some pictures of the crowd, it's a little smaller now, but it'll be good enough. Okay, now, you got it? Okay. All right, now, what else do we have to cover? There was something else that I just remembered, and that we should cover. And, oh, yes, very important. Yes.
So, I really don't have a question. I just have a statement. Nobody else in the room has said anything. I've been involved in the Chevra Kadisha for 25 years here. One of the issues that I have consistently, and it has nothing to do with anything that you've taught, but the supplies that we have. What you're trying to explain, the procedures that you're talking about, often what's available is nothing like you have on your table. Sometimes we don't even have plastic bags to wrap huge
So I'm going to stop you.
We don't have chucks.
I'm going to stop you right here. I spoke about this morning. It was one of the first things I talked about. I can't answer those questions. I can't address it. The fact is that the first thing you need to do as a Chevra Kadisha is have someone reach out to the funeral homes to discuss with them and make sure that they have the supplies that you need. Or, what we do in our own Chevra Kadisha is we will take, we used to come with buckets that had supplies in them. We brought our own supplies. We took it from, they used to call us the bucket brigade. Okay, we used to come with our own buckets, and until, we still do actually. Some of the guys carry a hot solar case, but we have all of the things that we need. Our leaders, when we talked about last night going out to 11 towers, all of our leaders carry a XXX set of tahrah, so that if the funeral home doesn't have the large set of tahrah, they have it. We just call the tahrah guy, and he sends us a new one and bills the funeral home. Okay, so you have to work together with the funeral home and move to the next step, or you will not have the really the advantage of having all these lectures.
Joel Bauman, who happens to be the treasurer of the Chevra Kadisha, he supplies all of the leaders, or offers to all of the leaders, a duffel bag. I have one in the trunk of my car, with all of these supplies. Maybe not the 100% acetone, but everything else Moncels, yes, both Moncels you need.
Yes, it's on the table.
It's on the table.
That was the very important thing you were about to say.
I will get to that now. Okay, so please figure out a way. We can have your attention. Figure out a way to make sure, it's not only that, it's up to the leaders to replenish every once in a while what they might be missing. So there are people who come to my office on a regular basis and resupply themselves with things that they need. So there's a need on the part of everyone involved, particularly those who are frequent goers and are the leaders of the Chevra, to make sure that you have these supplies. You have that list for that purpose, so every once in a while you check it. Now, what I didn't talk about is where you have no infectious disease. And that means that you're going to a Tahara, like I told you last night, they went to do a Tahara with C. diff. Okay, it was late at night, they had just done 3 Taharas, and actually one of the women is a nurse, and she was very nervous. C. diff is something that is, no one wants to have C. diff. It's not. Now I will say this, as I've said many, many times, I don't know anyone who ever got sick from a Tahara. I really don't. I've cut myself, I suffer with a bad back. As you can see, I'm sitting a good part of the time. Years ago, I lectured for 6-7 hours straight, and never sat down. It was great. Time flew, I didn't notice. Now, I sit as much as I can, because I don't know if it's all that. A lot of people my age have the problems without ever doing a Tahara. So I don't know. But whatever it is, at least I have something to blame it on, so I blame it on Taharas. But Baruch Hashem, having done tens of thousands of Taharas, not thousands, but tens of thousands. I don't know exactly, I never kept the record, but I know it's probably, if I had to guess, I'd say at least 30,000 Taharas. Okay? So, Baruch Hashem, you do Taharas. These people, I will tell you, before we knew about AIDS, we did Taharas on AIDS without gloves. We did them for years. Okay? We had no idea. Baruch Hashem, no one I know got sick from a Tahara. Nevertheless, we need to take precautions. And part of that is even for our own well-being, emotional and mental well-being. And so, therefore, when you know that someone has a particular thing like C. diff, or they have something like hepatitis C, and by the way, we recommend strongly everyone should get hepatitis B shots, but hepatitis C, okay? Or you have shingles, or you have meningitis. There are certain things that we know are dangerous. AIDS, AIDS, people have AIDS. Baruch Hashem, AIDS isn't, as common as it used to be. Certainly we don't know about it as often as we used to. The fact is, we deal with all these cases. We do full Taharas on all these cases. So what do? The answer is you follow what the Center for Disease Control tells funeral directors to do. And I will tell you that what we do is much less dangerous than what they do, because they puncture all the organs, and air comes out, whatever it is, it's much more dangerous. But they do it. So this is what we need to do. Before you begin the Tahara, first of all, wear gloves. Not a bad idea to wear double gloves if you want to. You don't have to. I'm not a big fan of masks, although for C. diff, possibly I would suggest it. Okay, certainly Jacob Kreuzfeld, if you're going to do anything, I would probably use masks. The biggest problem with masks are if you have glasses, the masks will fog your glasses. And then you go like this just once, all the masks is undone 10 times over, if not 100 times over. You don't want to deal with it. So I'm not a bit, people I spoke to who are professionals in the field, masks are really not necessary for what we do. However, if you want to wear masks in those cases, fine. You will prepare all the supplies that you might need for this Tahara, meaning you'll put some tape on the wall, you'll pour off a little Moncels, you'll put out 3 or 4 or 5 Q-tips, you'll put out a few toothpicks, you'll set aside a scissors and all this. So you don't have to go back to your supply area. You don't want to touch anything while you're doing this Tahara. Just lay it all out in advance. A. B, make sure you're properly dressed. C, you will take, last night, I made sure before the women got to this funeral that they had bleach on hand. We will use bleach. I recommend using lemon-scented bleach, because regular bleach is very strong smell, very hard to take, and you fill in the water for the rechitza, the first water, the lukewarm water, add 1 quart approximately of bleach to 10 quarts of water. So if you have a 3-gallon bucket like we talked about, you could put in 1 quart of bleach and put in fill it almost to the top of regular water. It's 10 to 15, I think it's 12 to 15 parts of water to 1 part bleach. Okay? And as you are washing the body, you are decontaminating it. Okay? That's what you use for the rechitza. By the time, whatever blood, it's the same thing, just put it into but you're using this water. When you're cleaning blood, use the same water, it's all, and you're decontaminating as you go. I would save some of that water with the bleach, okay, put it aside. At the end of the tahara, I would wash down the table, wash down the spigots, wash down the door handle, okay, and try to be as careful. You don't want to, you have to also be careful not to pour the bleach on your clothing. That's another reason to protect yourself, because it could easily stain clothes. You don't want to, we talked earlier about coming to a tahara comfortably, okay? You're going to a tahara like this, if you know, it's always a good idea. Have a tahara set of clothes. It's not a bad idea to have it, so you're not worried about it. The worst comes to worst, so you got to stand on your tahara set of clothes. You won't be as pretty the next time you go to a tahara. That's the worst thing. But whatever it is, that's how you deal with these cases, all of these cases. At the end, whatever supplies you prepared, throw it away. So you're not going to put it back into your supply. What about scissors? Soak it in, fill some of that water with the bleach in a pot. Just let it soak for a minute, and just wash it off. That's how you deal with it. Okay, and basically you are covered. You've taken all the appropriate precautions, and that's it. Okay, and you don't have to worry about anything. Whatever fluids are there, you'll wash down the table afterwards. Whatever there is, it's not to be concerned about. And I will tell you that we have been using this for years. What's difficult is for older people, especially people who have issues with respiratory issues. Probably not a good idea for them to go to these towers because it's hard to breathe. When you're doing, also you have to be careful when you're pouring water, pour more gently, because the more the water splashes, the more it will get into the air. Now, the water of the tahara, which you're going to shoot now, right, that water is not a problem because it's not water with bleach. That's regular water, okay? That's basically how you deal with all of these cases. Yes?
I think my impression, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the funeral homes clean up after. I mean, do all the decontamination. I think that's the whole one. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you can smell that they have.
I wouldn't assume so.
Yeah, that's what you like.
It probably depends on the funeral home.
Right.
Some of them might, some of them might not. But again, it's not a bad, we have, for example, a policy. We will never put a case like this into a mikveh. Simply because we don't want anyone else who doesn't tahara later to think, oh my God, I wonder what was in here yesterday.
But also,
Okay? Yeah.
there was, several months ago, someone from, I believe it was CDC, came with a PowerPoint presentation about our safety. And adding to that, what you said was when you get home, like usually you have, I know the women wear the big boots, the tall boots, keep them outside, and then go directly to like a shower area and strip and put everything in the washing machine immediately, and then wash it. Better safe than sorry.
Okay.
And then wash your boots like
I understand, again, there's no limit to the precautions we can take. I think that what we talked about is normal precautions that make sense. Of course, everybody comes home with tahara. Most people shower. If you're at a particularly uncomfortable tahara, then I would put my clothing into the laundry right after that. Do you have to do this after every tahara or anytime you have this? I don't know about that. But certainly if you have a situation where you are concerned about something, yeah, these are very good ideas. I would always wash up even on Tisha B'Av. I would wash up with soap and water, okay, after a tahara. That's the halacha. You want to make sure that you're clean. You're not bathing for comfort. You're bathing for your health, and that's perfectly okay. Yes?
In your opinion or your view, if the mikveh were available for mace versus the Tisha Kabinet's poured, which is no, you have an opinion on
Do
that?
I have a preference? Not really. Unless it's someone that went to the mikveh every day, I would consider the mikveh preferable. For most of us who don't,
down that's put into, the down that we're collecting from all these, even on a cloth, that we're putting into the aron, should it not be put into a plastic so that?
Preferably not, but if it's in a plastic, like you have a pouch that's full of blood, you put it in, I would
Right.
make a few holes in it. That's what we try to do,
I'll make a few
okay?
holes,
Right, sometimes we will leave it somewhat open, and I showed them yesterday, and you just reminded me because I was gonna forget to do this, I'm gonna do it now. But we use the Excelsior, that extra wood shavings, to separate the blood from the body so that the blood does not dirty the tahrah. Sometimes you have something that's wet or whatever it is, you can use that to separate. I mean, if it's dry, there's no need to, but if not, that's a good idea. Let me show you.
Crusted blood that you're washing off and it's on your washcloth.
I would say that.
Say.
Yes. Now, okay, this Excelsior has a lot of uses. Now, we talked about always, I would suggest every one of you, before you leave, come here and take a look at the aron, because every pillow should be prepared like this. There should be straw underneath the pillow, so that the pillow sits where it will not slide out from under the head, okay? And the head should be appropriately raised on the pillow, okay? That's number one. Excellent thing to always try to do. Now, some of this straw, for example, you have a body that's in a fetal position. And you put a body like that into an aron, basically the body's lying on its side, because there's just no other way. You take some of this, and you put it underneath the shoulder that's down, and you raise it like this, and maybe even a little bit under the buttock. Now the body's lying straight. Now sometimes it'll be too high for the aron, and you have to maneuver. But you can put a person in a normal position where they're not lying on their side, facing down, just by using some of this straw. That's just one simple thing. Another very important thing. You will sometimes have a person that's just too long for the aron. Okay? You can, and sometimes, especially if you have a fancy aron, okay, what you can do is make a ramp so that you actually place the person almost on a recliner, okay, so that it brings up the upper part of the body. It's not so easy in an aron like this, which has a flat top and is not that deep. If you have a little bit of depth, that often will give you an extra inch so that you will have the ability to put a person in an aron that maybe would not fit otherwise by ramping with this. But here's a better one. There was a man in my community, used to go to shul. He lived here. I went to shul this way, leaving the neighborhood. He used to walk to shul this way, and he would walk in front of my car very often. I was waiting for the light to turn left, and he would be crossing right in front of me. And every time I would see him, I would say, oh my gosh, I hope I never have to do his tahara. Now, I don't want you to ever think that I look at people and say, oh my gosh, I don't never look at people with a tahara. But this man was unusual in the fact that he was a short man, but he was bent over like this. And this is the way he walked, okay, for many years. I knew him like for years. Just a very advanced state of, I guess, scoliosis, okay? And I knew that after 120 years, there's not going to be an aron that's going to fit this man. And I would always think it, oh my God, I hope I never have to do this now. Turned out, I'm an Eretz Yisrael. And at that time, Penny Hecht, Penny, was my assistant. I get a call from Rabbi Hecht, who says to me, you know who died? I said, no, who died? He tells me. I said, oh my gosh, I guess my fearless were answered. I don't have to do his tahara. I said, I want you to call the funeral home immediately. Tell them to get the deepest possible plain pine box that exists. We wanted to lay the levaya, and hopefully it'll be good. I said, keep in touch. Calls me back. He says, Rabbi, we're at the Tahara. He's in the aron. It's not too bad, but we're about 1.5 inches to 2 inches short. He's still above the aron by about 1.5 inches. What do you do? I told him, here's what you do. Okay, it was a deep aron. I I said, get some straw. Place it under his lower back. By bringing the lower back up, basically he was like this, the head goes back. Sure enough, it closed. Again, using that straw just to be able to fit someone into another. Just these are things that you should know. You should never need it, but these are just ideas that really could make a tremendous difference. In general, when you have you have people in the fancy, came up before, fancy caskets, I would use the straw in those caskets more as a support for the body rather than to raise the body. I would remove the straw from the bags that they're in. I would put it alongside the aron, okay? If a person's very heavy and they're going to fill the aron anyway, there's no problem. But if they're little, so rather than raise the body, which is really for the purpose of viewing, that's why they have these things, which is a bizayon, why not just take out the straw, kind of make it lower in the center, but along the sides you have the support so the body doesn't slide from side to side. It's supporting the body. At the head, I would always raise it a little bit anyway, like we do, so that the head, one of the things that I think is, again, for those Chevra Kadisha that are working mainly for a frum shul, okay, where everybody's from, this is not an issue. But when you're a community Chevra Kadisha and you're doing tahrahs for people that are not from, okay, you want them to feel comfortable if they open the aron to identify, and people do. In Eretz Yisrael, they identify everybody. In Shomer Adas, everybody gets identified. It's not, years ago, you don't open an aron anymore, okay, which reminds me of something else. But before we get to that, so the idea is you don't want the head lying all the way back. When I talk to people who don't do taharas, it's dirt in the eyes, and it's the fact that I looked down my grandmother's throat. Her head was all the way back, and her mouth was open, and it was terrible. You want to raise the head. You don't want to bring it up so that it's being viewed, but you want to raise the head so that the head is comfortably in a position that looks becoming. Okay? So that's what I would use the excelsior for. What did I just remember that I just forgot again?
Identifying bodies.
What?
Opening a casket.
Opening casket, opening the aron.
Opening the, oh, yes, okay.
Yeah, I was gonna ask that.
I'm going to make the statement because it's happened here. I am a very strong believer that when you have a situation where a body is being sent to another location, if it's in any way possible that the tahara could be done at the place of burial, I would strongly encourage it. Now, someone asked me the question, how could you have a funeral here and then bury somewhere else? Okay? And then have a tahara later? There's no problem. Nothing says that you have to have a tahara before the levaya. You have to have a tahara before the kvura. There's no reason why a tahara can't be done later. So if a person is having a tahara here, a levaya here, in the afternoon, and the kvura is going to be the next day, I would suggest let them drive overnight and have them come to New York or wherever it might be, Boston, I don't care where it is, have the tahara done that day and have the levaya the next day, rather than have levaya in the morning where it becomes too late to do it. Have levaya in the afternoon, the day before, and then drive it. Someone's nifter in the morning, you're not going to get the kvura elsewhere by that day anyway. Have levaya that day without the tahara. And in the afternoon, funeral home sometimes will allow levaya at 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. It's very convenient for people. Okay, now to take off work, they can go after work, and then you drive the person wherever it's going, or make a flight wherever it's going. We do this constantly from Florida, and we ship bodies all the time. People tell me the body's going here, it's going there. If it's a place where there is a decent Chevra Kadisha that will accommodate it, always suggest. Why? For a number of reasons. Reason number one is very simple. When it gets to wherever it's going, very often it's dirty. Because in the process of moving the body into the hearse and out of the hearse and here and there, and especially if you're not well trained how to place a body in an aron properly, there will be purging, there will be things. When it goes up in the air, it flies, the plane goes up, the plane goes down, sometimes it dips, bodies get dirty, okay? What happens when they get dirty? They arrive in St. Louis or Oshkosh, whatever, it doesn't matter. Funeral director is asked to identify the body, especially if it's coming out of town. People want to make sure it's really grandma, it's really this. They open the aron, but before the family gets there, they open it to see if it's viewable And what do they find? It's filthy. What do you think they do? They take off the shirt, they put on a new shirt. Who's going to do it? 2 Italians, maybe 1 Italian. Okay, not that I think that's Italians. It could be anything. It's just not Jewish people, and it undoes half what the Tahara does. And if they leave it, it's a bizayon too. Okay, so for all of, but then the biggest problem is the pouch. Do you know how many places the body never gets removed from the pouch? When you do a Tahara here, now if it's being driven up, it's not such a problem. But if it's being shipped, it's almost always in the pouch, right? What happens when it gets to where it's going? Is anyone going to open and take it out of the pouch? Are the guy at the other end going to really care? Adarabah, many places, if it comes with a had a Tahara, you're not going to open it because it had a Tahara. We're not doing the Tahara. Tahara's done there. They don't open it. And if they do open it, what do? They zip it open and they leave it. You know, they open it maybe a little bit to show the family so their family can see. They spread it a little bit, but they leave it or something. They just zip it open to the head, and then people stay in pouches. I'll never forget. I once did. In fact, it was not far from here. I once did a disinterment for someone that was being taken to Eretz Yisrael. It was in this area of the country. Okay, it was 12 years after the burial. The aron was gone. You can see slivers of little slivers of wood. The aron was gone. The entire body was still enclosed in a pouch. I don't know what it looked like inside. We didn't open it, but it was all there. It was a closed pouch. It got to Eretz Yisrael. They were horrified. But that's the way it made very easy disinterment. Okay, you didn't have bones. You had a pouch. It came out very easily. Terrible design. If this person did not get shipped to Eretz Yisrael, it would have been there forever. Okay? Yeah.
So we do the Tahara, put the Meta in the Aron, all of that packing, if that Aron is being sent on an airplane, somebody takes the body out and puts it back in a pouch?
No, when you do a Tahara that goes on a plane, they don't tell you to put the body inside a pouch.
No.
Ziegler
Most of the
case.
time they will.
Yeah.
What?
The Ziegler case.
Yeah, I
A
guess I
Ziegler,
don't have that
yeah, a
experience.
Ziegler is
Okay.
fine. Again, the Ziegler case, but very often, if it's already in a casket, they will very often just require you to put a pouch in, to pouch the body. With us, they always do. If it's being shipped, if it's being driven, it's a different story. But
The
it's
Jewish
being
funeral home, Torchinsky, the Jewish funeral home here uses the metal case, and then they'll put in the ice, and the front guy he'll screw it shut.
Okay, when it gets to wherever it's going, they're gonna have to put it into a regular casket. That's why, that's going to Eretz Yisrael.
Eretz Yisrael.
Now, Eretz Yisrael is another story. Okay, I'm not talking about Eretz Yisrael. Eretz
But
Yisrael is
shipping
a whole
in here
different-
in the
something
States.
in the United States, that's where the problem is. Not talking about Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael, forget about it, they're gonna take it out of everything, yes.
Could you speak to what to do with that aron that's not a standard aron where they have satin and all
So here's the story with those fancy caskets. Okay, so I'm gonna try to make it fit, because we're already have to hour overtime, but let me try to do this. The idea is very simple. Ramosha's guidelines were the following. Anything that's there which is not in any way replacing something that we have in our tahrah, in our system of preparation, is what he would call a narishkeit. Okay? So if you have in the top of the dome, okay, is some satin, or whatever it is, big deal, who cares? Leave it there. It's not a big deal. The dome is a narishkeit, and the satin's a narishkeit, and that's it. Okay? Now, there's a piece of satin that covers the straw. Okay? That is so that when people view the body, they're not going to see the straw. But we have something that replaces that. It's called the sovev. At least if you have the right size sovev, so it actually covers the whole thing. So when the family is going to view it, they're not going to see the straw, they're going to see the sovev. So who needs that? Throw it out. You're replacing something that we have with something that doesn't belong. So therefore you get rid of that sheet that covers it, should be taken out. The straw itself, since it's mattresses, it's put into paper containers most of the time. I would remove it from all those paper containers. Ramosha held that, again, anything that is being used for the purpose of doing something that is not in accordance with halacha or with our Masorah is a bizayon. Therefore, he held that a two-piece top is a bizoyim. Because what's the point of a two-piece top? It's for viewing. Okay? Nowadays, people say maybe it's not true anymore since we all do ID, and therefore for an ID you can use it. Maybe it's changed. But certainly over here, these mattresses are made for the purpose of raising the body to be able to be seen above the level of the aron. That's really what it's for. I created these mattresses, okay? Not why? Because at one point, they decided they're getting rid of all the excelsior, and instead they're going to have cardboard that could be locked in on different levels, okay? So the body could be raised. For us, that would have been terrible. And so we came up with a compromise, which was these things. But they're basically made to raise the body. Therefore, I would open, if they're not necessary, I would just take them out. If they are necessary, because you need some straw, I would open the bags, take out the straw, set it up the way I showed you, and then lay out the sovek on top of it. I would never put in any of those mattresses and leave it in the earth. As far as the pillow goes, I would never put a body on that pillow. But if you know a family is going to want the pillow, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky told them we have no right to throw it away. It doesn't belong to us. So therefore, we leave the pillow out, and if the family insists on it, the funeral director may put it in. But again, if you raise the head properly, the need for that becomes much less. But there are people who buy a $5,000 casket because they like the pink satin in the pillow, okay? The flannel, whatever it is. So you can't throw it away. We don't use it, we would never do it, but you don't throw it away, okay?
I mean, a lot of the funeral homes are very strict about that. You're going to stop fooling around with their $5,000 aron, they're going to get upset.
So
to take out the whole thing, you're going to see the stitching on the side. It's not going to be so simple. We could give. I could take a
First of all,
razor
we
blade.
do not. I didn't say anything about the stitching on the side.
No, I'm saying, but once you start
When
pulling
you
out,
know, we leave the stuff around the top.
right?
We just don't. We just remove that sheet that comes on top of it. That's all we do.
That pillow.
And that usually is not visible at all. If you
Okay.
if they open the body to look at it, they will see the sovek.
Okay.
Okay? All right. Anything else? I think we have pretty much covered it. Thank you very much for listening. And again, please, don't clap. Please, please, please. Go to our website, know what we have to offer, stay in touch, sign up for our newsletters. Let's stay in touch. It will help us, it will help you. It's Kedai. Okay? Yeah.
The plastic bag.